There are certain storytelling tropes audiences almost always love. The underdog, the mentor sacrifice, the hero finally standing up to the villain. And then there's the redemption arc. A character does terrible things, realizes they're wrong, changes for the better, and somehow earns their way back. Simple enough. Except, audiences don't react to redemption arcs the same way. Sometimes a redemption arc becomes legendary. People praise it for years, make video essays about it, use it as the gold standard for great character writing. And then another show uses the exact same trope, and fans absolutely hate it. Take Zuko from Avatar, one of the most beloved redemption arcs ever written. Then take Catra from She-Ra, a character who also spends years hurting the people closest to her before eventually changing. One redemption arc is constantly praised as a masterpiece. The other still starts arguments years after the show ended. And that's what fascinates me, because when people try to explain the difference, the answers never quite work. It's because Zuko suffered more. Not really. It's because Avatar is just better written. That's not an explanation. That's just avoiding the question. It's because Catra didn't earn it. Okay, but what does earn it actually mean? Because that's the part nobody ever explains. In the more examples I looked at, Zuko, Vegeta, Endeavor, Catra, Naruto, BoJack Horseman, the more I realize something strange. The best redemption arcs and the worst redemption arcs aren't actually arguing about forgiveness. They're arguing about something else entirely. And once you see it, you'll never watch a redemption arc the same way again. But before we get into the video, kindly subscribe to the Animated Memories channel for more videos like this. Let's start with the example everyone already trusts, Zuko from Avatar: The Last Airbender. But here's the thing, most people remember his story wrong. They think the moment he decides to be good, everyone just welcomes him in. That's not what happens. And the real way it happens is the first clue in this whole mystery. Zuko joins the group. He tries to help. He even makes them tea. But Catra doesn't accept him. She looks at him with pure anger, and she walks away. She doesn't forgive him just because he said sorry. She makes him wait. She makes him sit inside her anger for a long time. Not just one scene, but many episodes. And the show never tells us she's wrong for feeling that way. It never calls her bitter or unfair or too harsh. It treats her like a real person, someone who has every right to stay angry for as long as she needs to. So here is where our investigation starts. Let's write down our first idea. Call it Theory 1. Theory 1. A redemption arc works when the person who got hurt sets the rules, and the person who hurt them has to follow those rules on a timeline they don't control. It feels true, right? It explains Zuko perfectly, almost too perfectly. And here's a rule about mysteries. When an answer feels too perfect right away, that's exactly when you should start doubting it. But Vegeta breaks that theory, and he breaks it without even trying. Vegeta, from Dragon Ball Z, did terrible things. He destroyed planets full of innocent people. The day he first arrived on Earth, he killed civilians just for fun. He beat Goku almost to death, and across hundreds of episodes, there is no Katara scene for Vegeta. Nobody he hurt ever sits him down and makes him follow a list of rules. He almost never says sorry to anyone, for anything. So if Theory 1 is true, Vegeta's redemption should feel fake. It should feel cheap. He should feel like a character we're only told to like because the story needs another strong fighter on the good side. But it doesn't feel cheap, not even a little. Fans talk about Vegeta with the same love and respect they give Zuko. Almost nobody argues about whether he deserved his place with the heroes. So what's actually going on here? Once you look closely, the answer is simple. Vegeta never asks to be forgiven. Nobody needed to give him a list of rules because Vegeta was never trying to earn anything back. When he sacrifices himself fighting Majin Buu to save his family, he isn't doing it so people will finally say, "Good job." He isn't doing it for the audience watching at home either. He does it because, slowly, over years, he built a real life, a son, a wife, a home, on a planet he once wanted to destroy. Something in him actually changed. Nobody had to forgive him because he was never asking to be forgiven in the first place. So Theory 1 is dead. Here's Theory 2. A redemption arc isn't about the victim setting the rules. It's about whether the villain's change is loud and done for a reward, or quiet, done with no one watching. Let's see how far this theory takes us, before something breaks it too. If Theory 2 is right, it should explain other characters too. Let's check. Take Peridot from Steven Universe. At one point, she stands up to Yellow Diamond, one of the most powerful and terrifying leaders in her whole universe. She isn't doing this to impress anyone. She doesn't even know if the crystal gems are watching. She isn't performing for an audience. She just finally stops following orders from someone evil. And the moment works perfectly. She figures out who she really is only after she acts, not before. The change comes first. The understanding comes after. Now take Sasha Waybright from Amphibia. Her story is messier. She keeps slipping backward. Right in the middle of trying to become a better person, she makes things worse, not better. That's important. A character who only wants a reward would never take that risk. They'd want to look perfect the whole time. But someone who is actually changing doesn't look perfect. They stumble, they mess up, they keep going anyway. And by the end of the show, her friendship with Anne doesn't snap right back to how it used to be. A simpler show would have forced a perfect reunion. This show doesn't. It lets the sadness stay, because that's the truth. So Theory 2 is holding up. No performance, no trade, no problem. Now let's find the one example built to push this theory as hard as it can possibly go.
It's okay if you don't forgive me. Because I don't want forgiveness. I want to atone.
Now look at Endeavor from My Hero Academia. He says it plainly. He isn't trying to be forgiven. He isn't trying to win his family's approval. He isn't performing sadness for anyone to see. By Theory 2, this should be the cleanest case on our whole list. Here's a man who refuses the reward, and just does the hard, ugly work of trying to be better, whether or not it ever earns him love back. And for a big part of the audience, it works exactly like that. When his son Natsuo refuses to forgive him, the show doesn't say Natsuo is being unfair. It says Natsuo is right to feel that way. Both of our theories are being followed perfectly in the same scenes. So why does the other half of the fans still feel like something is wrong here? Here's the uncomfortable answer. Even though the show follows every rule we've found so far, it still spends a huge amount of its warmth, its screen time, and its best animation on the man who caused the damage. His battles look heroic. The music swells for him. Meanwhile, the family he hurt sits quietly in the background. A lot of viewers feel that screen time should have belonged to them instead. This tells us our theory still isn't finished. There's something bigger we haven't named yet. A redemption arc isn't only about whether the villain performs for forgiveness. It's also about where the story chooses to point its sympathy. And that choice can quietly hurt a victim, even when every other rule is being followed perfectly. Keep that uncomfortable feeling close, because we're about to watch a show break this rule completely, with no shame about it at all. Catra never gets a Katara scene. There's no version where Adora sits her down, sets clear terms, and watches her meet them slowly, over time. Instead, near the end of the show, the story just decides the relationship is healed enough. It seals that decision with a kiss. That kiss is the show's way of telling the audience, the debt is paid, stop asking questions. But nobody ever asked Adora, the person who actually has the right to decide that, to weigh it herself. The story made the choice for her, and just handed the answer to the audience. It gets worse one step further up, with Shadow Weaver, the woman who abused Catra and helped turn her into someone capable of that cruelty in the first place. Shadow Weaver does one good thing near the very end of the show. A large part of the fans refuse to accept it as redemption. The reason is the same one we just found. That one good act is being used to pay off a debt it was never owed. It wasn't even Catra's place to forgive Shadow Weaver for a lifetime of damage. The show just says the debt is settled and expects us to agree. Now we finally have the right words for what's actually broken here. It isn't just that these stories feel rushed. Speed isn't the real problem. The real problem is that the story takes the verdict away from the person who was owed it and hands down that verdict itself on the audience's behalf. Naruto does this too, in an even more direct way, and honestly, it might be the funniest example of this whole problem in the entire show. Orochimaru is one of the worst people in the entire series. He kills his own teacher, the third Hokage, a man who raised him like a son. He runs human experiments on his own students, treating people's bodies like spare parts. He's the reason Sasuke gets the cursed seal that nearly destroys his life. This isn't a guy with a tragic backstory who made one mistake. This is a war criminal. And by the end of the story, he's just around. He shows up to give advice. He helps out during big fights. Later on, he even raises a kid made from his own cells, like a weirdly devoted snake-themed father. Nobody arrests him. Nobody really confronts him. The show just sort of moves on, like everyone collectively agreed to stop bringing up the human experiments at dinner. It's almost funny how casual it is. One of the most dangerous war criminals in the franchise becomes the guy who pops in with helpful information, and the story treats it like that's a totally normal career change. No one who actually suffered because of him, no family member, no surviving victim, ever gets a scene where they're allowed to say, "Wait, hold on, are we really fine with this?" The show just decides the past is the past and asks us to move on right along with it. So here is Theory 3, the strongest one yet. A redemption arc completely breaks down the moment a writer takes the verdict away from the victim and announces on their own that the character is forgiven. This explains everything so far. Zuko, Vegeta, Peridot, Sasha, the split over Endeavor, Catra, Shadow Weaver, Orochimaru, all of it fits with no contradictions, which is exactly why we need to try to break it. A theory that has never been tested isn't a real theory, it's just a guess that hasn't failed yet. Let's go find the one show that was built, almost on purpose, to destroy this theory completely. Now here's a show that seems to break our theory completely, until you look closer and realize it's actually proving it in a way we hadn't considered yet. BoJack Horseman. At first glance, this show looks like it skips the verdict entirely. Nobody gives BoJack a Catra scene. Nobody stands in front of him and says, "I forgive you," or "I never will." Compared to Natsuo's flat refusal or Katara's open threat, BoJack's victims seem to just drift away, quietly, without ever announcing a decision. But that's not actually what happens. Look closer, and almost every person BoJack hurt does give a verdict. They just don't say it out loud, they show it. Take Hollyhock. At one point, she sends BoJack a letter. We never hear what it says, but we watch his face as he reads it, and it's clear. She's cutting him out of her life. That's a verdict. It just isn't delivered as a speech. Take Charlotte, a woman BoJack once had feelings for. When he comes near her family, she tells him directly to stay away from them. No ambiguity there at all. That's a boundary, stated plainly. Take Diane. It's true she never gives BoJack a scene where she lays out terms for him to meet, but it's wrong to say she simply stops answering his calls. What actually happens is slower and, honestly, more realistic. She moves to Houston. She gets married. Her life fills up with less and less room for him in it. They still talk sometimes, all the way to the show's final episode. She never says the words, "I forgive you," or "I don't." The show leaves that question open on purpose. What she does make clear, through her choices, is that BoJack doesn't get to be close to the center of her life anymore. Take Sarah Lynn. She'd spent about a year working hard to stay sober. Then she goes out for one night with BoJack, falls back into old habits, and overdoses. And here's the detail that changes how every viewer sees this moment. Once he realizes how serious it is, BoJack doesn't call for help right away. He waits 17 minutes. That's not a small detail. That's the moment a lot of the audience stops being able to fully forgive him themselves, verdict or no verdict. Take Todd. He never gives a big speech either. He just keeps showing up for BoJack in his own way, while also refusing to pretend BoJack's behavior was ever okay. Caring about someone and excusing them turn out to be two different things, and Todd is proof you can do one without the other. So the truth is, almost nobody in this show is denied the power to decide what BoJack means to them. Hollyhock decides by leaving. Charlotte decides by drawing a line. Diane decides, slowly, by building a life with less and less space for him. Todd decides by staying, but without excusing him. These are all verdicts. They just don't come as courtroom speeches. So Theory 3 doesn't actually break here. It goes deeper. We'd been assuming, this whole video, that giving someone authority over the verdict meant giving them a dramatic scene, a Katara moment, a Natsuo moment, a clear yes or no spoken out loud. BoJack Horseman shows us that's not actually the requirement. A victim doesn't need to make a speech to hold real power over what happens next. They just need the freedom to decide for themselves, in their own way, even if that decision is quiet. Even if it's just walking away without a word. That's the piece our theory was missing. And once you see it, the real shape of the rule finally comes into view. Here it is, the full answer. It was never really about whether a victim gives a verdict out loud, on camera, in a single dramatic scene. That was never the actual rule. That was just the shape the rule happened to take in stories built around big, speakable moments. A threat from Catra, a refusal from Natsuo. The real rule, underneath all of it, is this. A story has to be honest about power. And real power doesn't always look like a speech. Go back through every example with that in mind, and something interesting happens. They all line up, including the one that seemed to break the pattern. Zuko's show is honest. It hands the verdict to Catra completely, lets her hold it in a loud, clear way, and makes Zuko wait on her timeline for as long as she needs. Vegeta's show is honest in a quieter key. It says some change was never a transaction in the first place. Nobody needed to grant Vegeta anything because he was never asking. Endeavor's show is honest about Natsuo. The discomfort some viewers still feel isn't a crack in the writing. It's the honesty doing exactly what honesty does, telling you, truthfully, that doing the right thing later doesn't guarantee a story will spend its sympathy fairly. That discomfort isn't a flaw. It's the cost of telling the truth. Catra's show is the lie. Not because Catra didn't change, she did. The lie is in pretending the debt was settled when the story had no right to make that call on Adora's behalf. In sealing that lie with a kiss, so the audience would feel it instead of question it. Shadow Weaver's final act is the same lie, just smaller and arguably crueler, because it asks a victim to retroactively forgive a lifetime of damage in exchange for one good afternoon. Orochimaru is the purest version of the lie. Nobody is even left standing with the right to object. No victim gets a scene, a letter, a single moment to ask whether the debt was ever real to begin with. The story just moves on and asks the audience to move on with it. In BoJack Horseman, this is the one that actually taught us what the rule was missing. It looks, on the surface, like the show that withholds the most. No dramatic forgiveness, no dramatic refusal. But once you actually watch where the power goes, you find it everywhere, just never delivered as a monologue. Hollyhock holds it and uses it by writing a letter we never get to hear. Charlotte holds it and uses it with 4 plain words: stay away from my family. Diane holds it and uses it slowly, over years, by building a life that has less and less room in it for him, without ever once needing to say the sentence, I forgive you, or I don't. Todd holds it by staying close while refusing to pretend any of it was fine. None of these are courtroom speeches. All of them are verdicts. The show simply trusts that a quiet decision is just as real, just as final as a loud one, and it never once steps in to tell the audience how to feel about any of them on the victim's behalf. That's the piece the rule was missing the whole time. Honesty about power was never really about whether someone gets a scene where they say the big line. It's about whether the story lets the people who were hurt keep their power in whatever form they actually choose to use it. Spoken or silent, dramatic or small, a threat or a letter, or a slow goodbye nobody announces out loud. That's the real formula, finally said in full. Not villains must be forgiven correctly. Not even victims must always get a speech. The rule is simpler and harder than that. A story has to let the people it hurt keep real authority over what happens next, and tell the truth about it, instead of deciding the ending for them because the truth would have been more inconvenient to write. So here's where this actually leaves us, and it's bigger than any of these shows. We don't watch redemption arcs because we're curious whether fictional characters are capable of change. That's never really been in doubt. People change all the time, in small ways and in enormous ones. We watch them because most of us are quietly holding power over somebody else's ending too, and nobody ever taught us what to do with it. The apology. We never said the words, I forgive you back to, even though we let the person stay in our life. The friendship that didn't end in a fight. It just slowly had less room in it for someone, the way Diane's life slowly had less room for BoJack. The boundary we drew with 4 plain words and never had to explain. The letter we wrote instead of a conversation, because some things are easier to say when no one's watching your face while you say them. Fiction sometimes gives us the loud version. Katara's threat, spoken and answered. Vegeta's sacrifice, fully earned, no words needed. Natsuo's refusal, said straight to his father's face. All of it given shape, all of it closed by the time the credits roll. But just as often, fiction gives us the truer version. the Hollyhock version, the Diane version, a verdict that never gets spoken out loud, delivered instead through what someone chooses to do next. And somehow, that ends up being the one we trust the most, because it's the one that actually looks like real life. That's why this trope matters more than its premise should ever allow. It was never really asking whether a villain deserves forgiveness. It was asking something closer to home. Do you have to make a speech to hold power over your own life? Or is it enough to just quietly decide, in your own way, what happens next, and let that be the whole answer? If you've made it this far with me, I think you already know which version you actually trust. Tell me where you land. Not because I want you to agree with me, because I think you've got something real to say, and I'd genuinely like to read it. I'll see you in the next video.